online panel discussion on tips on how to start exporting your coffee to Europe will start in 1 minute from now. So see you in a bit. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on tips on how to start exporting your coffee to Europe. My name is Charlie de Boer. I'm leading the research team for the coffee and cocoa sector on behalf of CBI, and today I am your moderator. I am super excited to see that we have so many people joining this webinar from all over the world. Now, let's talk about the program of today. The main goals of today are to get an idea on how to price your coffee, to know better on how to connect with European buyers, to gain knowledge on how to draw up contracts, and to gain insight on how to define your unique selling points. But before we get into that interesting content, we need to explain GoToWebinar, the tool that we use for this session. Now, the tool is really simple, and you only have a few elements in your menu. First of all, you need to know that we cannot hear or see you. So you can wave at us, but we won't notice. However, you do have the option to post questions in the field under questions, and I really invite you to do so. Well, we don't have the time to answer all of your questions, but we will try to answer as many questions as possible during this webinar. Also, on the background, a team of CBI members is available to answer some of those questions. So please add your questions in the question pane. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not here alone. Most content will be shared by our panel of experts. Gabrielle and Sandra, please turn on your camera. Can you please introduce yourself? Sandra, Gabrielle, can you please start?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Gabriel Chaitz. I'm the founder of Poxtech Consulting, and I collaborate with stakeholders from across the coffee supply chain. I have a background both in coffee agroforestry and as a coffee buyer. And so I really enjoy working with coffee farmers, coffee buyers, building more resilient supply chains, learning how to do this coffee trade better. And very happy to be here and sharing with you guys.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. How about you, Sandra? Can you take over?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Loofborough. I have a company called Loop Coffee Consulting that's mostly around coffee training and education. I am a Q instructor with CQI and the SCA. But today I'll be speaking mostly from my capacity as co-founder of OpenFloor, which I have in collaboration with my business partner, Ben Bicknell. We support producers and exporters who are looking to access new markets or extend their presence in existing markets through business strategy and capacity training and other support. So I'm really grateful to be here today and looking forward to spending some time with you all.
Thank you very much. Now, was very interesting. We will be hearing a lot more from you during this webinar, but before we do that, I would like to ask Hans to turn on his camera. And well, Hans, this webinar is hosted by CBI. Can you please introduce yourself and explain to CBI to those unfamiliar with us?
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, I'm unable to share my screen, Charlie.
That's okay. I will share the slides, right? Or would you rather do just
my screen, my webcam?
Oh, the webcam. Okay, yeah, no problem.
See if it's
okay. There you are.
Yes,
great.
I see myself. Hi. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Hans Mensa, and I am the program manager for market intelligence for the coffee sector. And I'll give a short introduction for those who are here for the first time. So CBI is part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, also known as RVO, and we are funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. CBI stimulates sustainable trade and production in developing countries we connect SMEs in developing countries on the European market through our programs. We are active across 14 different sectors, which most of them are predominantly the agriculture sector, such as coffee. We have worked in over 70 developing countries across Africa, Latin America, and as well Asia as well. Currently, we are active in about 24 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. At the moment, we have a coffee program in Uganda, whereby we help farmers to become EUDR compliant. Charling, I'm unable to see my slides. Are you sharing it?
Yeah, I think I'm sharing it, but I can't see them either. So something is not working. Let me check. Yeah, here you go. Yeah.
Can you go to the previous one, please?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So I'll start by our mission. So how do we achieve this? How do we help SMEs to export their products to the European market? Well, firstly, we provide trainings and coachings led by our market experts and export coaches on the ground. So in developing countries, in our projects, we try to solve one sustainable sustainable challenge. For instance, a decent job on youth unemployment. So we promote these kind of things such as decent jobs. We pay attention to women and youth employment, and we support women in management positions and also women entrepreneurship. So that's the first one. The second was by providing market information, which you can find for free on our website. We provide market information on how to export your products and services to the European market. And yearly we publish over 300 studies on our website. Charlie, can you move to the next slide, please? Yes. So we provide market information on tips on how to find European buyers, also on the product fact sheets, let's say on exporting Robusta to the European market, what is the potential. We also have a lot of information about organic coffee and on tips on how to organize your exports. So it's important to know that these studies are all free of charge and they are updated almost every year. So if you stay to the end, I will show you how to access this information on our website at the end. That being said, I would like to hand over back to our moderator, Charlie.
Thank you very much for that introduction of CBI, Hans. Now, well, let's get into the next topic, which is the overview of the European market. But before we get into detail, I would like to give, I'd like to start with a short question. And that is, how large is the European consumer market? You can just click the answer you prefer best. Is it 1/5? Is it about 1/4? Is it about 1/3 of global consumption, or about half of the global consumption? I see many answers coming in. That's great. Of course, if you don't know, doesn't really matter. Just guess or don't, whatever you prefer. I give you a few more seconds. Okay, here are the answers. Pretty fine. Actually, answer C is the correct one. Europe accounts for almost 1/3 of the global consumption. Europe is the largest coffee importing region in the world. Their consumption amounts to 3.25 million tons per year. Within Europe, 6 countries dominate the import landscape, jointly accounting for about 80% of all European coffee imports from producing countries: Germany, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. Germany leads as the primary importer and a trade hub, with most coffee entering through major ports such as Hamburg. It has a high demand for both specialty and certified coffee. Italy follows, distinguished by its powerful roasting industry with brands like Lavazza and Illy, and a strong preference for espresso blends with huge imports of Robusta. Spain is recognized for its out-of-home coffee culture, and it's Europe's largest market for decaffeinated coffee. So remember this one if you aim to sell decaffeinated coffee. Well, Belgium stands out as Europe's top re-exporter, serving as a critical trade hub between producing countries and its European neighbors. Switzerland is unique for its focus on specialty and certified coffees, hosting some of the world's largest roasters like Nestlé. Also, most multinational traders have offices in Switzerland. The Netherlands excels in both roasting and re-exporting, increasingly sourcing directly from origin and serving as a gateway to other European countries. Now, as Europe is such a big market, it also hosts many different target groups with their own demands. And of course, there's demand for both Robusta and Arabica. About 70% of the imports comprise of Arabica, but this highly differs per region. In most southern European countries, the demand for Robusta is more than 30%. And if we travel more north, the demand for Arabica increases. This also applies to certifications such as Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance, or Organic. Where in southern European countries, the demand for certified coffee is low, this demand is higher in most northern and western European countries. And then we see a rising demand for specialty coffee all over Europe, with countries such as Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, and Sweden leading. The European market is a very mature and a very saturated market. That means that almost everyone who wants to drink coffee already does. And this also means that the total amount of coffee consumed is expected to remain stable in the coming years, not showing dramatic volume growth.
Charlie, sorry to interrupt you, but I think we cannot see any slides. We still see the
really?
quick.
Yeah, sorry for that. Thanks for that. Thank you, Hans.
No problem.
So this is the slide I wanted to present. Yeah, so what does premiumization look like in Europe? It shows up in the rising interest in specialty coffee. That means that coffees that are recognized for the unique flavor profiles, high quality, or direct traceable origins. And European consumers are already seeking authentic stories about where and how their coffee is produced, and what sustainability practices are used, and what makes their coffee unique. Second, the ready-to-drink market is a major driver of premiumization in the European coffee market, as it caters to consumer demands for convenience and taste. And many brands are introducing their ready-to-drink coffees with unique flavor profiles and functional ingredients like vitamins and proteins. But well, because this trend of ready-to-drinks is mainly relevant for exporters of roasting coffee, we won't go too deep into this trend. Over 95% of the European coffee imports comprise of green coffee. And there are some amazing exceptions like Guzo and Coffee Annan, that companies that import coffee roasted at origin, but these companies are still exceptions. So, and the rest of this webinar, we will focus on exporting green coffee, starting with pricing. And that brings me to my next question to you, which is, how do you determine the price of coffee? Please select one of the following. You can just click the answer you prefer best. That cost or profit margin, is that current market price? Is that future market price? Or do you think that the buyer just decides the price, or perhaps this is just not applicable for your business? Please click the answer you prefer best. Okay, now it seems that the current price, including market differentials, is the largest one. That brings me to you, Gabriel. Can you give our attendees an insight on how to best set their prices? give you the presenter rights in a bit. I think you're still muted, Gabriel.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, happy to talk about why pricing matters. I've worked with a lot of coffee farmers, a lot of coffee producers, cooperatives that have beautiful coffees, and this hurdle can often be one of the bigger challenges to accessing the market. And it's not just that, it's also a point of contention around the sustainability of your business. So markets are dynamic, they can often be volatile. It's very important to know why pricing and what your pricing is and how it affects your longevity as a coffee producer. Having fair and transparent, consistent pricing can open a lot of doors. We'll talk a little bit about what that does with relationships, how that works with coffee buyers. And like I said earlier, there's many steps between when a coffee is produced and when payment is made. So understanding these key aspects of pricing are really critical to building a sustainable coffee offering as you're approaching an export market like the EU. So too high, very simply, no buyers. Too low means you'll go out of business relatively quickly. That right price can lead to long-term partnerships. It's really important to understand what we're talking about when we talk about price. When I talk about price here, I'm going to be referring essentially to FOB. For those of you who haven't exported or aren't familiar, this is just a way to refer to the price of coffee when it's being loaded on a boat leaving for export. So if you see the value chain here, a very simplified diagram, this will include all of the costs and all of the margins from producer all the way through the exporter. So wherever you sit in that chain, however many vertically integrated stakeholders you have, this FOB price is generally the one that's negotiated. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about other formats. But when you're approaching buyers or when they're approaching you, this is generally the price that we're talking about, which includes all of these aspects from the farm all the way to the port. That FOB pricing, like I mentioned, includes all of your direct costs, your secondary costs, plus all the labor, logistics, paperwork. So this is where it's really important to know your costs. It's not just the cost of producing the green coffee, the cost of processing and milling the green coffee, but there's all kinds of secondary costs when we come to export the coffee to a destination market, and many risks. So there's always a delay between production, milling, export, and payment. And there's many variables like currency, spoilage, insurance risk that also have to be accounted for as you build your pricing for a coffee bar. There's 4 coffee strategies, very kind of generally. The first one is simply knowing your costs and adding your markup. So just determining what it costs you to produce the coffee and adding your margin on top. The second one, which I think most of you referred to, would be a market-based approach. So you're looking at the market, you're trying to understand where coffee prices are generally for the region and coffee types that you have, and you benchmark your price. In other markets, like the specialty market or the certified markets, there's often a value-based price. So this can start to divorce itself a little bit from the C market, but we're talking about values that are very unique and specific to a buyer or their consumers. Could be quality, could be traceability, could be all kinds of things. And then the last one would be some kind of hybrid, where you set a floor based on your costs and your margin. You set that ceiling based on the market and what you kind of see people are getting for the coffee, and you find kind of your equilibrium in between. And we'll talk about 2 of these just to kind of run through some examples. This is a very simple diagram of the cost plus situation where you know, and this is also in dollars per pound, also to kind of refer to the C market price, which is published. You have $2.70 at farm gates. So that's green coffee coming out of the farm, either because you're producing it or you're paying it to your member producers. But you also have processing costs, quality costs, warehousing, transport, all of these different fees. And if you add that up and you add a margin, which in the end also has to be considered to be competitive, about 10% on this kind of coffee, you would land at a price of $3.90 per pound. So this would be the price that as you approach a market or a buyer, as you start to talk about price, this could be the price that you offer in that initial conversation. The other way to do it, which again, I think most of you are already familiar with and maybe already using, is to really benchmark yourself off of the market. This is beneficial in the sense that you will have a much more aligned price with where coffees are, and also quite risky. And we all know that the coffee market has been quite volatile over the last couple of years, and it doesn't seem like that's going anywhere. So we have to be really careful when we look at a benchmark, not just referring to the C market price and the differentials on the open market, but also working with local stakeholders and relationships to get a sense of what coffee is going for in your region. There's some great online tools, actually one that Sandra has put together with her colleagues, futures.coffee. It's a great place to just get a sense of where the C market is, what the trends are. And in terms of differentials and other information, you can always check the ICO website, but it's a pretty murky world to try to get some of that information. So what I would suggest is also building relationships with other local cooperatives, with other aggregators, try to share and triangulate where prices are in your region. So you get a much more valid benchmark for the type of coffee that you have and the market that you're going towards. Again, always, I'll repeat this many times, but always keeping in mind what your costs are. So that last point is critical. You want to seek those opportunities to sell your coffee to open markets, but you don't want to be adding pressure to your production profitability or capabilities, especially long term, by simply going for a very advantageous or momentary opportunity. So using this market-based mechanism is quite helpful for being competitive, but we also want to be sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure in the future. The last one would be relationship-based approaches, and this takes you to a different interaction with the market. With the cost plus or with the market-based approach, you're essentially competing on an open market and trying to set out a price that will be competitive with other farmers, producers, exporters who are sending coffee out of your region. If you have the opportunity to build relationships, to seek out buyers, to seek places and moments to have conversations and present your coffee, you have a different opportunity to set a price. There is the opportunity to work with buyers who are looking for specific coffees to understand what their price ranges are. You can develop your own offer sheet, your own value-based offer from your coffee. That's much more unique. It has a lot more attributes than a simple price to quality number. But then the opportunity would have to come in getting samples in people's hands, having an opportunity to have that conversation with a buyer so that you can come to a sense of what would be the price range, especially in a value-based system where there is a quality differential. So if you are able to produce different qualities, if you are able to produce different processes, this is where having those kinds of conversations with an off-taker could be really helpful, because maybe you have the opportunity to sell the meat of your harvest, the standard qualities at a certain price, but there's always the opportunity to build in dynamic pricing that goes up depending on the values and attributes of your coffee. An important thing here is to always try to ask and share transparency. This is an opportunity to build a relationship where the price might be dynamic, it might change over the many years, but building that trust with an off-taker or a buyer could lead to a much more healthy and regular adjustment of that price based on your cost. And always to seek shared risk. So if there's certain asks being made by buyers about processing, experimental processes, payment terms, which we'll also talk about in the future, it's ideal to not simply take those on, but seek a way to share that risk through some kind of payment guarantees, some kind of fixed pricing. But the idea here is that if you're able to get through some of these challenges and the inevitable volatility that comes in a coffee selling and buying relationship, you will be able to graduate to a much more sustainable and healthy approach in the future. You can also choose your target market depending on your volumes. If you're a mass producer, you don't have the opportunity to really work on processing. You shoot for the commercial market, which will have the largest volume, but mostly tied to the C market. And as you become more attribute focused, as you start adding value, the demand for that coffee might diminish, but the price will certainly go up. And again, my suggestion here would be every coffee farm generally has a kind of a bell curve variation in qualities, is not simply to target one of these markets, but understand that there are many different places where that coffee can be placed, many different buyers who are interested in taking that coffee. And so trying to parse out where you stand and who you can work with, depending on the kinds of coffees you're producing. When you're trying to think about European buyers, especially, there's a large array of them. Europe is wonderful for being such a large market, but it is incredibly diverse as well, right? You have, I used to live in Portugal, and coffee there is quite different from where I live now in France, quite different from, you know, the Nordic countries. So different buyers are looking for different qualities, and they're also looking for different secondary qualities. But what I know most, if not all, buyers are always looking for and really appreciate is efficient execution on deals and very clear communication. Especially as you're entering a market, there's always a chance that things won't go as planned. And that's understood and can be tolerated with clear communication from both sides. It's important to know that even if you've entered a deal, if a harvest is delayed, if a truck breaks down, if there's some unforeseeable circumstance that that arises, communicating early and often can help really soothe any diminishing returns from that relationship and even strengthen the relationship going forward. Transparency is always key, especially now traceability with EUDR. And more, I guess, value aligned buyers are looking for transmission ratio. So they want to know how much of the price, the FOB price, is moving down the supply chain towards the original farmer. That's a really good point of information to have. And generally looking for that price to quality to volume ratio that we were looking at before. You also want to be really careful in your price to build in flexibility and risk. The biggest one generally with these kinds of contracts is going to be currency. If you have a contract in euros per kilo or dollars per kilo, there's always the chance that that currency can vary wildly. Between the time you sign the contract, you pay for the coffee, and you're looking to export it. So there's different ways to mitigate that. But if you are in a region where the currency can be quite volatile, it's highly recommended to add in a bit of a buffer to make sure that that volatility is taken care of. And also just knowing your true costs, like I was mentioning earlier, make sure that you have a bit of a buffer there, because those costs can always shift depending on geopolitics, depending on the volatility of the market, and even with the currency. I'm sure you all know the price of fertilizer, the price of trucking, the price of transport. So even if you have a very clear set of pricing, you know exactly where you are, you want to build in a little bit of a buffer for these unforeseeable circumstances, and to know what your walkaway price is, to know that there's a certain price below where you would likely not be profitable or the opportunity wouldn't be worth it for you, and have that price established before as you approach a market, so you kind of know what where you stand. So finally, those tips for success when you set your pricing: really document your costs, know from the farm all the way through to the port who you're working with, what it's going to cost you, so you know what your baseline is. Knowing your product is critical, knowing what the attributes are, knowing what the value is beyond a set of numbers and a quality score helps a lot to have a much more dynamic price. Being really clear when you quote buyers can be really helpful, and again, being efficient in that communication. Offering dynamic offers with multiple grades is super helpful to help buyers find where they can work with you, and seeking those value aligned buyers. So whatever your values are as a producer, as an exporter, whatever it is you take a lot of pride in and desire to continue to push in the industry, there are the buyers out there who are looking to work with you. And so finding them, knowing how to communicate to them, knowing how to offer a coffee that's priced competitively enough in the market in Europe especially, will be really helpful. So I hope that helps you guys understand the price mechanism in the EU market, and I'll send it back to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I think that was a very clear story. But if you do have questions on how that works, or perhaps you would like to know more about how that might translate to your business, please add your questions to the question pane and we will come back to that later. In the meantime, I do have a question to you about our new topic, which is about buyers and finding buyers and connecting with those European buyers. So my question to you is, what are the best buyers for your business? Are those large trading companies? Are those specialized trading companies? Are those the roasters, or perhaps the other stakeholders, or perhaps this is just not applicable to your business? Please submit your answer. Just click the answer you prefer best, and I will close the poll now in a few seconds. Okay. It's very interesting. It seems that specialized trading companies, followed by roasters, are most interesting as best buyers. Now we go to you, Sandra. Can you please tell us a bit more about how to connect and how to find the buyers you want?
Absolutely. Give me one moment. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to go through a few different kinds of buyers quite quickly. The idea here is just that you understand some of these buyers' priorities, so that when you're faced with presenting a potential lot of coffee or other product to them, you understand what they're thinking about, what their priorities are, and how to meet their needs. Now, we are just going to focus on these three types of buyers: large international, like large export importers. We're going to focus on specialized export importers, and we are going to talk about direct trade. But before we get too deep, I want to remind you that these are broad customer types, and within each section there are many varieties, and there's many specific kinds of buyers that might work just perfectly for you. Today we're just talking about broad strokes. So what kinds of businesses do these companies run? First, let's talk about large trading companies. So these are global supply chain actors that move absolutely enormous volumes. They operate in multiple producing and consuming countries. They manage their own logistics often. They manage their own finance or have very tight relationship with financing institutions. And they handle their own risk management, which is another really important key. So imagine that this company is working maybe in 30 different countries, maybe in 15, but probably closer to 30. They're managing fresh harvests across the world. They're managing fresh arrivals across the consuming world. They're handling logistics, they're handling loans, and they're handling purchasing and sales. So what are their top concerns? They are extremely concerned with risk management, especially with pricing. I understand there was a question about what the C market is. My colleague Gabrielle showed the futures.coffee website. The C market is a way that buyers can set prices for future lots of coffee based on a global exchange market called the C market. And large actors like trading companies can use the C market to hedge their contracts, which means they're protecting their new investments with existing assets, or they're acquiring new assets to protect their existing contracts. And this is all done on the futures market. They are also very interested in consistent and reliable supply. This is another form of risk management. They want to purchase and rely on coffees that will be the same year over year, that will arrive to their port of destination the same way they left the port of origin, and that they're able to sell to their customers with very little concern. They're also extremely interested in compliance with all regulations in Europe. Of course, we're talking a lot about EUDR, but if there are organic certifications or fair trade or RFA, bird friendly, etc., making sure that those certifications are accurate and up to date is of extreme importance to these companies. And finally, they're interested in efficiency. This is across logistics, financing, and warehousing. Coffee logistics can be quite messy, and when you're working in these large trading companies with millions of pounds of coffee, it's very important that things do go according to plan whenever possible. And if there are consistent sort of frictions with efficiency in shipping or financing, that might lead a large trading company to search for business elsewhere. Let's move on to boutique trading houses. So again, these are importers. Sometimes they export out of origin as well. They're likely operating at a significantly smaller scale than multinationals, although boutique trading houses can manage quite a bit of inventory as well. They are primarily focused on specialty and differentiated coffees. So while as large trading houses might work with quite large volumes of commercial coffee as well as specialty coffees, these boutique trading houses are primarily focused on specialty. They tend to curate portfolios, meaning they might specialize in a specific type of coffee or type of origin or process or partnership. They are more likely to invest in origin relationships, and they often offer marketing support to producers and exporters in origin as a way to support their own sales and to gain access to green buyers who want to feel that they are more connected to their producers and exporters. What are their concerns? They're interested in differentiation. So they want to know that their coffees are different, hopefully better, than the coffees offered by the large trading houses, but they are also extremely concerned with consistency. Now, in this case, consistency probably means cup profile more than cleanliness, although cleanliness and lack of defects is still extremely important to these trading houses. They are also very interested in storytelling. They want to know exactly where the coffee came from, and they want to be able to trace that story all the way back to the farm gate. These trading houses might have more flexibility in the sense that they might be managing smaller volumes. They might be able to build mixed containers with more facility. They might carry some spot offerings for buyers who want to access coffees without buying in advance. And they will also certainly offer forward contracts to their customers. And their primary concern, I would say, is building and maintaining long-term producer relationships and long-term customer relationships. And finally, we're going to talk about direct trade buyers. Now, these are roasters who, to some extent, bypass importers to build direct partnerships at origin or with exporters. But it's very common that these types of buyers are actually partnering with importers for logistics and compliance support because, as I mentioned, logistics of coffee shipping is or can be quite a nightmare. And these small buyers don't have the access to funding and security and logistics to manage that on their own. So they might find a coffee and contract it themselves and then book shipping through a third party. This is more common in the specialty segment, and often these buyers are buying smaller volumes, although there are examples of roasters who have grown to become quite large companies and manage all of their own buying through direct trade. So their concerns are going to be slightly different because they are one step closer to the final consumer. They are very interested in having really strong relationships with the producer or exporter because that storyline, that through line supports their end product. In some cases, there might be a request for exclusivity, but this isn't super typical. They are very interested in having quality alignment with the producer and exporter, but also with their brand identity. So they are looking for coffees that match their specific, unique service offering and their specific unique brand. They're likely interested in transparency and social impact, so they might be interested in providing or knowing about farmer premiums. They might be particularly interested in sustainability or in specific social programs. And they likely have reliable but flexible logistics support. for smaller shipments. They're likely using mixed containers. They're likely partnering with a third party to support with logistics. And because they're managing their own inventory, they might have slightly more flexible timelines than other buyers. Before we get too deep into the buying process, I want to talk about a few different types of samples. So typically when a buyer is seeking a coffee lot, they will request a sample. And exporters and producers can provide several different kinds of samples. One is a type sample. This is just a sample that is a representation of the type of coffee that this producer or exporter has. So it is not tied to a specific lot or even a specific harvest. It's just to give the buyer an idea of what might be available at the next harvest or next year. In contrast, offer samples are tied to a specific lot that's currently available. So I might provide an offer sample to a buyer who I know wants to buy this type of coffee at this price in this timeline. And if I'm providing an offer sample to a buyer, I'm going to tell them what I expect as far as timeline and communication, because ultimately this is a live lot that I want to move. So I'm going to say, I have this offer sample. It's tied to this lot. It has this volume. I'm offering it this price, and I would like to hear back from you in the next 3 to 5 days regarding your interest, because I am showing this to other customers as well. Pre-shipment samples are the samples that are sent after a contract is signed and before the coffee is on the water, or likely just when the coffee hits the water. This is just to match the lot that was offered with the lot that was shipped. And the arrival sample is sent after the coffee arrives at the port of destination, again, just to match that it coincides with the pre-shipment sample and the offer sample. This is another way of managing risk for buyers, and it's a great way to maintain communication with your potential customers. Now, we've talked about a few different kinds of green buyers, and remember there's a lot of nuance here, lots of different kinds of businesses, but typically a green coffee contract evolves in this way. I, as an exporter or producer or purveyor of green coffee, will make initial contact with a potential buyer. Hopefully in that conversation, I'm asking about the types of coffees they're interested in, about the volumes they're interested in, the timeline, and the price, so that when we get to the next stage, which is coffee sampling, I can provide a sample that's relevant to their needs. The way that different green buyers process samples can vary pretty significantly. Some buyers only look at the green coffee, meaning they look physically at the green beans and determine whether they're clean or unclean, or take a look at physical damage, etc. Most likely do sample roasting and cupping. Most will provide sensory evaluation, and I highly encourage you to request sensory feedback or general feedback from this stage of the negotiation process, because it can really help to build alignment and understanding and make it easier for you to meet potential buyers' needs. Hopefully after sampling, we move to the contract stage. So here we're talking about specific lots, specific contract terms, specific qualities, shipping timelines, etc. And then finally, we deliver the contract. So we're sending out pre-shipment samples, we're managing logistics and shipping, tidying up the final details. And here I want to remind you that the relationship doesn't end when the coffee is shipped. Ideally, we're continuing this relationship into the next year. I encourage you to ask your customers for feedback and follow-up, and be curious about how the coffee has performed over the course of that year, and try to sow the ground so that they're ready to repurchase again next year. Now, it can be really difficult to get in touch with green buyers, and green buyers are notorious for being poor communicators and generally difficult to work with. I work really hard in my business to make green buyers better at communicating and at negotiating and at being good partners. But I do sort of want to set the context that actually coffee buying can be quite overwhelming, and it is constant. So while I, as an exporter or producer, have just 1 or maybe 2 harvests a year, and that's a ton of work, and I have very busy seasons with a lot of intensity, Coffee buyers are typically doing that for almost all coffee growing regions. And so throughout the year, they're dealing with that high level of intensity or high volume of samples for different parts of the year that are experiencing harvest and processing and shipping. And so this is an example for the Northern Hemisphere of what a timeline might look like. For example, if I'm buying coffee from East Africa, I might be sampling and contracting forward in Q1. In Q2, I'm going to be receiving arrival samples and begin releasing that coffee onto my menu. Q3, likely everything's still going well, but by Q4, I'm looking at renewing those contracts and starting to sample again. So it's a constant cycle that you can see happens at different cadences depending on what origins I'm working with. So these are the main tasks that a green buyer has to accomplish if they're maintaining good quality control and good relationships. They're constantly sampling, they're constantly managing their contracts and releases and position. They're constantly doing inventory checks because no matter how often we're checking our spreadsheet, there's always going to be a bag or 5 or 10 that goes missing somehow. And they're always doing menu planning. Again, this is not to condone the lack of communication that green buyers have, but it is to sort of set the tone that they are busy and it's difficult to reach them. In addition, green buyers act as sort of the main access point for both upstream and downstream communications in their businesses. So they're negotiating and communicating with producers, exporters, importers, and warehousing logistics all the time. And downstream, they're likely talking with roasters, quality control teams, sales and marketing teams, retail, and maybe even cafes or consumers. So it's a lot of people to manage. It's a lot of information to communicate. And we can understand that it might be difficult to reach them, to grab their attention, and to make my offer sound interesting to them. We talked about the different kinds of samples that you can provide at different parts of the relationship. But what I want to mention here is that we don't want to overwhelm green buyers with just anonymous samples. So I am not going to provide samples on a show floor to someone I've just met. I am not going to provide samples to a green buyer that I'm not familiar with. I don't know their needs. I don't know their business type, etc. I am going to provide samples after I've had initial conversations with a green buyer, when they've expressed explicit interest in the types of coffee that I'm offering, when they've confirmed that they have time to process my samples and provide feedback, when they've said that they're looking for something that sounds just like the kind of coffee that I'm offering, and when we've talked, at least initially, about the kinds of price range that I'm willing to offer and they're willing to pay. And to close out this part of the conversation, I want to remind you that not all customers are the perfect fit for you. We've talked about 3 main types of customers. I've mentioned over and over again that there are a huge variety of green coffee buyers out there. I understand that we need to sell coffee. That is absolutely the primary goal. But I encourage you to think critically about who we are partnering with, because not every green buyer is a perfect partner for our business. For example, direct trade can sound really romantic and beautiful, long-term relationships where both of our businesses flourish. But there are some cons. There's a lot more work. There's a lot more risk. There's a lot less certainty. And maybe that form of relationship doesn't quite fit your business model. That's okay. It's important to be inquisitive and reflective about what kind of business do I want to build? Do I want to sell large volumes of coffee year over year over year? Do I want to sell separated micro lots that are really interesting at a really high price point, really carefully processed and curated and sold? What are the coffee products that I'm offering, and how much time do I want to spend on sales? Do I want to spend each harvest season talking with dozens of buyers, hoping that they'll each buy 5 or 10 bags? Or am I more interested in leveraging volume and working with just 1 or 2 larger buyers who will buy the majority of my coffee each year? So thinking about what kind of relationships I want to create with a green buyer and what kind of business relationships best support my business will help you figure out what relationships will benefit you, and when maybe it's best to say, you know, I don't think this is the right fit. I wish to sell my coffee, but maybe not today, not to you. Maybe I'll find a better opportunity in the next conversation.
Thank you very much, Sandra. That was very clear. So now we have an idea on how to connect and find your buyers. But if we connect with our buyers, we still are not there. We still need to negotiate and set some contracts. And I would like to go to Gabriel for some more information on that. Gabriel, can you help us and explain to our audience how to set the contracts?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Like you said, it's pretty critical. Even when you've built relationships, when you have the opportunity to work with buyers, in the end, you want to hope for the best and also be ready for the worst. But a contract can certainly provide protection for all parties, and it's critical that we just ensure that everything is written out. So from the negative side, the contract can protect you, it can protect the buyer. It allows everyone to understand exactly what is expected. And from the positive side as well, we have a lot of trade mechanisms that can actually be unlocked with a contract. So contracts can act as collateral for trade financing and can facilitate all kinds of trade flows. So they're very critical documents to understand and to be very careful with, and also just to avoid any disputes that can come up with coffee being an agricultural product. We never know what's going to happen, so at least when it's written out, we understand what the expectations are. For EU buyers, we generally work with an EU standardized contract. You can see it here at this website. It's very similar to the US-based green coffee contract, and it lays out all the different stipulations. And here you can kind of see how it might be laid out live, but some of the main buckets here are listed here. So from a very basic level, how much coffee are we talking about? What is the quality of that coffee? What's the price that's been determined? And very importantly, at which point will that price go into play? And we'll talk a little bit about that. What are the delivery terms? This is a big one, and we'll talk about this in a slide coming up about when is this coffee changing ownership? So when does it go from your ownership to the buyer's ownership? And when does the risk of anything happening to that coffee change? This is stipulated in the contract and is a very key element of it. It can also lay out which port it will depart from, which port it will enter, the shipment period, so the window of time that you would like to send this coffee or be able to. As Sandra was talking a little bit about, a critical piece of this are approval and sampling terms. So whether the coffee is going to be accepted no matter what, whether that acceptance is based on a arrival sample, whether that acceptance is also predicated on a sample leaving before it gets on the boat. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then payment terms and arbitration. So who decides what happens if things don't go according to plan, which we always hope will never be the case, but we want to make sure that we have some information in there just in case. And there are a lot of official entities that will serve that purpose. So one of the key pieces of this contract is going to be the Incoterms, as we discussed. And this is going to decide when the coffee is changing hands, when the coffee leaves your ownership as an exporter and enters the ownership of a buyer or an importer. This is a very simplified diagram here, just to talk about the main terms that are generally used. But as you explore exporting, I would highly suggest on the CBI website, on other online platforms, or with Sandra and myself, seeking out information on what terms are, especially if you don't understand them. Because there are a lot of different modalities that this can be done to facilitate whatever your situation is, but they're very critical to understand. So FCA means that the coffee is free on the carrier. So the coffee you've delivered to a carrier, the risk and your payment ends there. The typical term that we use, FOB, free on board, is where you are responsible for all of the costs and risk up until the coffee gets on a boat. And as soon as it's on that boat, payment is initiated and your risk is over. The last one, CFR CIF, means that you will be carrying the risk all the way to the port of destination or further. So these are just 3 different ways that a contract can stipulate, first of all, up until when are you responsible for that coffee, and also charging for the services provided. And most importantly, or also as importantly, when will you likely be paid for turning over that coffee? If it's at FOB, we'll talk a little bit about what the different ways that those payments are made, but as soon as the coffee enters the ship, you can initiate the payment process if FOB is stipulated in your contract. Quality and inspection will also be stipulated. This is really critical for especially specialty markets. You, as Sandra mentioned, you want to work with reference samples and really establish what the approval protocol is before you engage in the contract, so that you know that if there's an expectation for a certain quality, you know what the expectation is for the kinds of back and forth that will happen before the coffee moves its way to port. Pre-shipment samples for high-end lots are often required and asked for to make sure that the coffee is of the quality being sought for. And then approval terms, which again, if you go into some of the literature, we don't have time to go deep here, but the terms of the approval of the contract might be based on a landed sample. And if that's the case, you have to be ready for any kinds of shifts in quality over the course of the shipment, over the course of the ocean freight as well. And you want to always include what happens if quality differs. Is the coffee then replaced? Is the price sent to a future contract? So just to really be careful with the quality and inspection clauses, and maybe dive into those a bit more deeper as you develop your draft and ideal contract for your buyers. Payment terms is a big one as well. And again, here are some very simplified but important terms to know. The safest generally for an exporter is going to be something called an LC, or letter of credit. And this is where a buyer applies for the credit to pay for the coffee that you are selling. And the bank acts as an arbiter. As soon as you turn over the documents, there's an automatic payment made to you. So this is a service that the bank will charge for. It can be a bit costly, it can be hard to establish for smaller roasters if they don't have lines of credit or aren't very large businesses, but this would be the safest way to start a relationship. A similar way would be cash against documents, where there isn't that automatic trigger, but it is a way to use a bank to say, as soon as I hand over the documents to the buyer, I'm expecting them to move the payment from their bank to mine. So this doesn't come with that guarantee that no matter what, the payment will be made, but it's a more structured way and a bit less risky. So once you have a bit of a relationship, once you have a bit of time working with the buyer, you can explore this modality. And the last one, which is very much based on relationship and trust, would be the open account. So this is where you're saying, I trust you to pay me according to what we've decided. This can be set in the contract, and allowing the buyer to make a payment to your account without going through an intermediary bank if needed. Credit terms will also be established on the contract, and these net days would be the days after delivery that the buyer has to wait to make the payment. So net 30, net 60, net 180, it can go even further. But essentially, the buyer is asking for an amount of time from when you've delivered the coffee to be able to pay you for that coffee. So it's critical to be very careful and very aware of what these terms are, so that you know when to expect your payment, to also protect your cash flow. If you've already made the investments, paid all the service providers, and you have a 180-day term on a contract, you won't get paid for 6 months. Your cash flow will be locked up, and it's a very critical piece of the puzzle to make sure that you don't run into trouble. So we're going to go through some different negotiating tips and maybe a little bit of role play as well, very simplified. But initially, the tips would be to have a draft, kind of do a little bit of research, work with some people to come up with a draft of what your ideal contract and terms would be that you can share with potential buyers. Know what your non-negotiables are. If your cash flow is very tight, know that you simply can't give extended payment terms, and just make sure that that never becomes the case. And also trade concessions. So if a buyer asks for a certain concession, maybe you can ask for a different one, and we'll look at how some of those play out. And very importantly, confirm everything in writing. Even if it's just over email, make sure that any conversation that's had, any agreement that's made verbally, a lot of buyers like to work over WhatsApp, over different kinds of communication. So just make sure that anything that's been agreed to has been sent in writing to ensure that there's no misunderstanding. So the first example negotiation area would be on the payment terms and the pricing. So here on the left, you have all the different parts of the contract that might be asked for some kind of negotiation from a buyer, because those buyers generally are going to want the longest payment period they can possibly have, the lowest method of payment, the one that requires the least investment, and they usually want to pay after receiving the coffee, while you as a seller would like to be paid relatively quickly. You want a secure payment method like a letter of credit, and you would also like to be paid before the coffee arrives. So there's a bit of distance here. So on the left are some of the terms that you could negotiate with the buyer. Something typical would be that the seller yourself would request a letter of credit for the first shipment, saying, I'd like to do this letter of credit. This way I'm protected, you're protected. The buyer might say, well, I'd rather do the CAD because it saves both of us money, which is true, but it is a bit risky. So the compromise, and again, all of these negotiating areas are to try to find compromise with the buyer, is to say, well, let's do a letter of credit for the first 2 containers, and then we can move to the CAD if those payments are on time and everything flows well. So finding where that compromise is key, and knowing where your non-negotiables are as well. If a buyer asks on payment terms, they need 60 days to pay. Okay, it's understandable. It's not out of the ordinary. But if your cash flow is tied up, you might only offer 30. So a compromise there would be to say, okay, let's work with 45 days after the coffee is delivered, but to build in that price increase to cover the financing costs, so that if you're borrowing money to pay for your cash flow, that's also incorporated. So just making sure that you know what you're offering when you're negotiating and how to make sure that you're also being protected on the back end. The second area would be around quality. Obviously, buyers would like quality to be exactly as they expected, and they would like to be able to reject the coffee if it's not meeting the quality that they expected. They often like to have a sample to approve before the shipment is made, and they want a lot of different guarantees on moisture, on sensory, on all kinds of different qualities. And the sellers also want yourselves, realistic, achievable opportunities. There's a lot that can happen between the farm and a coffee roaster in Europe, and leaving enough flexibility in there is critical. So let's say a buyer wants to have a minimum of 85 points, and you know that over the course of the shipment from, if it's Ethiopia, Indonesia, Colombia, there might be some variety in the quality. You can say, let's work with an 84-point guarantee, and then let's have a premium if the score goes up. This is one way to adjust and kind of build a dynamic compromise. This has to be written into the contract. All of these compromises should be written into the contract. Or the seller has a very tight spec on defects. They want maximum 5 per 300 grams, but you know that your coffee is good, it's clean, it just has a bit more defect in it. So you can offer some kind of compromise. So 8 defects per 300 gram sample, but averaged out to 6 over the entire lot, just to build a little bit of that wiggle room and to make sure that everything's well defined, so that when the coffee arrives, it fits the documentation and the language that you've used, and there's no need for arbitration or any kind of conflict arising. The next one is the shipping and logistics terms. Buyers are generally always going to want the fastest routing from your country to theirs. They would love the coffee to arrive exactly on time, and they would love a flexibility on the port choices depending on their preferences. And you as a seller might want to go with the most financially available, or the cheapest version of reliable freight, the one that doesn't require a lot of finance for you to get to a certain port, a longer shipment window depending on how the harvest is coming, or a fixed port, just so you know exactly where you're going to ship from. And a typical negotiation area here could be around transshipment. Sometimes a container being moved ships can be quite a bit cheaper, but also cause a container to take a lot longer and have the risk of loss or issues with the coffee. So if the buyer requests only direct shipment, but you see that you are maintaining control over the shipment, that a transshipment would save quite a bit of money, you can offer to increase the insurance. So again, this is just a way to come to a compromise of terms to build these relationships and to find the win-wins. And again, always putting them into the contracts. And the last one, which we've mentioned a couple times over the course of this workshop, is samples. So samples, especially with value-driven supply chains, with high-quality specialty lots, are going to be really critical. Buyers are going to want as many samples as possible and for free, generally, and they want to be able to approve it before shipment and also approve it when it lands. And as a seller, you want to offer a fair amount of sampling, but also not incur an immense amount of cost in doing so. And also want to have a reasonable tolerance for the quality matching when it leaves the port of departure to when it arrives at the port of destination, because as we know, coffee will always change a bit over time. So a typical negotiation might be a buyer requesting a pre-shipment sample, and you know that their communication isn't always super on point. They take time, and that also that would delay. You would be a minimum, of a week or two to get the sample there and the information back. So you might push back a little bit and say that it's going to delay the coffee. And the compromise there might be that you can send that pre-shipment sample immediately, limit their time on approval. They have 5 days, and say that on day 6, unless they've responded in the negative, that the coffee moves forward. But again, this has to be built into the contract to make sure that there's no questions once it comes up. The last one would be around quality matching. A buyer is going to want to have exactly what they asked for showing up at their doorstep, but we also know that coffee is an agricultural product. We never know what's going to happen. Some variation will always happen between the farm and the roastery. So just coming up with an acceptable range of quality. And again, just building this into the contract to ensure that if anything comes up, if there's any variation, it's already been laid out what will be done. Is there a price adjustment down, maybe up? Or is the buyer allowed to actually reject the coffee, which would mean that you would have to find a different buyer for that coffee and then fill that contract with a different lot. Some common mistakes that people can make when they start this is not having very clear quality terms, not including that arbitration clause to say that if there are any concerns, that there is an arbitrating body that will deal with those concerns to make it as fluid and efficient as possible. Offering very long credit terms can be quite risky, even though it can win business. It means that payment will be tied up for a very long time. And any kind of lack of clarity around delivery timelines is also really critical, because coffee buyers, if they're good at their job, will be trying to manage their own cash flow and ensure that coffee is arriving when they expect it to without overbuying. So you want to be really clear on when you can actually deliver that coffee, and they can be really clear on when they expect that coffee. Some best practices are to always sign any kind of written contract, but just get every communication in writing, most importantly. It's always great to review it internally. These contracts, especially larger contracts, can be for a very significant portion of your cash flow of your coffee production. So you want to be really careful when you sign these contracts. They're a legally binding document. And also have your template. As you approach new buyers, as you approach a market, it works really well to offer them the template that you would like to work with. You know that you like to work either FOB or a different delivery modality. You know that you can work cash against documents or a letter of credit. To have this already ready facilitates the flow quite well. So as I said at the beginning, contracts are critical. I think no matter how strong the relationship is, they're important to have. I've worked with many producers as a buyer over many, many years, and we're always surprised at what kinds of things can happen. And having a contract, even when there is a tremendous amount of trust and an honest, sincere desire for mutual success, having a contract can help those conversations flow much more efficiently, and most importantly, make sure that everyone is aware of what the expectations are. So I would say that strong contracts are indicative or can lead to strong partnerships. And I think there's a lot of work and important opportunity to be had by diving into the contracting portion of your exporting business. I can send it back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. There was a very clear message at the end to always have a contract. Now let's move to the next topic, which is about defining your unique selling points. And before we get there, I do have a new question for you. How do you distinguish from competition? I'm wondering, is that price? Is that quality? Is that care for your customers' need? Perhaps it's not even applicable to your business because you're in this webinar for other reasons. That's always possible, of course. See many questions coming, many answers coming in. Give you a few more seconds to answer this question. Please submit your answer. Now it seems that most of the companies that are here with us in this during this webinar will like to focus on quality followed up by care for what your customers need. That's very interesting. Now, Sandra, I would like to go to you. Can you tell our audience a bit more about how to determine their unique selling points, please?
Definitely. Let me see if I can share my screen again. Here we go. You seeing that?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to try to go quickly through this. As always, there's so much more to say, but I want to spend a little bit of time exploring what could make your product unique. Here are the main drivers: quality, origin, context, producer story, production and processing methods and styles, and then finally, connection to buyer values. Now, when we talk about quality, Gabriel spent quite a bit of time talking about quality in context of contract terms, which is extremely important. And I don't want to undercut that at all. That is the primary goal here, making sure that the quality that's contracted is what's delivered. Excuse me. And you have really clear understanding from both the buyer and the seller on what quality you're talking about. But when we're talking about marketing and storytelling, quality can become a little more poetic. So one thing to think about is talking about the species and variety. You might just be working with Arabica, but perhaps you also work with Canephora, Robusta, or Liberica. And variety can be really interesting too. I saw there was a question in the chat about recommended varieties or ideal varieties to work with. There's a lot to say on this topic, but what I would encourage is that you focus first on honing your processing methods and your consistency year over year before getting too invested in different varieties. Remember that a coffee plant can take 3 to 5 years to start producing. And so investing in the stock that you currently have and renewing the stock by doing successful pruning and plant management and making sure that your processing methods are pristine is a great way to improve the quality and consistency of your product without investing in a new plant that might require different care or different techniques. Not to say that it's not worth investing in new varieties, but just that it's quite a different path than investing in improving the quality of the plants you already have. Another way that we can talk about quality is through green coffee metrics, which Gabriel also mentioned. So here we are talking about moisture content, which typically we want to see between about 10 and 12%. Water activity is an enormous indicator of coffee quality and shelf stability. Density can be really useful, especially for buyers who are roasters themselves, because density can impact the way a coffee behaves in the roaster pretty significantly. Screen size can be really useful. Of course, there are many regional definitions of screen size, yeah, this is just a pretty useful metric, again, especially for roasting and for density and for general quality. And finally, we have green coffee defects. Then, of course, cup profile. So here we're talking about specific tasting notes or maybe suggested use. It might be that your customer really wants to use this coffee for espresso or for pour over or for single origin, for example. As you may know, our industry is going through a little bit of change regarding cup score as we've officially moved away from the CQI method of scoring and are moving into the CVA form. But it might be that your customer still uses the CQI method of scoring coffees, or it might be that they have their own internal cup scoring system that they use to determine their purchases. And finally, quality can also include certifications or growing practices or social efforts, etc. The next item is origin context. So here we want to talk about the place and the environment that the coffee comes from. We can talk about geography, of course, not just country, but region, town, farm, elevation, soil type, shade trees, etc. Also providing some context on the history of coffee in this region. How did coffee come to this particular country, and what has been its impact over the last few decades or centuries that it's been in this particular place? And again, some information about communities and culture. What is coffee's role in this particular community? What is the impact that it's had on the culture? Is it a prime means of survival for folks? Is it of enormous cultural value? Or is it just a cash crop, which is also fine, that provides livelihood for dozens or hundreds or thousands of people? We can talk also about producer story. This is just people and relationships. I want to encourage you here, or remind you that you're in charge of your story. The point here is that you are choosing what information to share and how to share it. So this could include the identities of the people who grew this coffee. That could be a particular farmer or family. It could be a larger cooperative or mill. It could be some more background context, like the history of the particular farm or mill, the values that that co-op espouses. It could be the motivations that brought you into coffee or the culture, etc. And we can also talk about the impact that coffee is having on these communities. For example, are there premiums or redistribution of wealth that happens after contracts are signed? Are there specific partnerships you're really proud of? Are there gender equity initiatives or sustainability programs that you're working on? All of this can be really interesting to potential buyers, especially when their values aligned. And then we talk, of course, about production and processing. I encourage you to speak at length about the care that you're taking to produce your product. So this, of course, can include the methods. For example, harvest method, or is it hand harvest? Are you training harvesters to only harvest ripe cherries? Are you using bricks, meters, etc.? What is your processing method? Are you washing cherries? Are you milling cherries? Are you using raised beds? Are you using solar dryers? Are you using greenhouses, etc.? We can also talk about innovation. So maybe you're working on building a new solar dryer. Or maybe you're working on improving quality by building channels. Maybe you're saving some of the gray water and reusing it in some way. All of that can be really interesting to potential buyers and support their motivation to buy. You can also talk about challenges and achievements. So how are you adapting to climate change, or what changes have you seen? What infrastructure investments have you made? What shade trees have you found work really well on your farm, for example? And then we have the connection to buyer values. So here it's about the relevance to a particular buyer, and not all buyers are going to be invested in the same ideas or the same values. So the most important thing here is market fit. Why does this coffee matter to this buyer? And again, it might be that this particular buyer doesn't care about sustainability initiatives, for example, but they do care a lot about gender equity. Or it might be that this particular buyer is less interested in processing methods and more interested in just quality and consistency year over year. Understanding exactly what each buyer is looking for and being able to speak to their particular needs can be an incredible tool. So here we can talk about ethics and sustainability, like social initiatives or EUDR compliance or biodiversity or personal relationships. And we can also talk about your long-term vision for your business and how this buyer might fit into that story. Is there an opportunity for multi-year relationships here? Can you build your two businesses together so that you both grow and thrive over the next 10 years? Or is this sort of a one-off contract and you're just selling coffee and they're just buying it? So here is a green coffee story green coffee storytelling checklist for you. We're going to talk about coffee and cup profile. That means cupping notes with clear, accessible language, maybe some brewing or roasting recommendations, and maybe some clear differentiation. How does this coffee stand out amongst its competitors? We're going to talk about origin context, so country, region, specific farmer cooperative. We can talk about altitude, climate, soil, terroir, and the influence that that might have on the cup profile. We can talk about the history of coffee production in the area and its impact on the culture. We can talk about the producer's story, who produced this coffee, what is their history and their journey in coffee specifically, what is their vision or their mission in coffee, and what impact and social partnerships are they creating. Talking about production and processing, you should probably mention species and varieties that you're offering, as well as specific processing methods. You can talk about infrastructure, innovations, and challenges, buyer relevance. So again, certifications and compliance, sustainability, and long-term relationship potential. And then providing supporting materials can be really helpful. Remember, your buyer is going to turn around and sell this coffee to their customers. So providing them with photos of the farm, of processing, of producers, if that's something you feel comfortable with, can help them create promotional materials that support their sales and encourage them to come back to you the following harvest year to purchase more coffee. Sending paperwork for certificates or certifications, meaning if you won an award or a local competition, sending information about grading and analysis reports. Again, this can be moisture reading or water activity, etc. Making sure that you're sending all the information about the samples. We've talked a lot about how important that is. And then marketing tools for them. You might provide a one-pager or a lot card, or you might have your own social media that you encourage your buyers to share with their customers. You might curate a website for your business or for your products, etc. Making it easy for them to access information about your product so that they can speak with authority about the coffee that they are then providing to their customers. Briefly, I want to talk about what makes a successful sale. So here we want to make sure that we're building trust and having really clear shared expectations across the supply chain. So ideally, we create relationships that last many, many years. This happens by making sure that we are aligned on the quality and contract terms that we are each providing and expecting, and that we then deliver on those terms and are able to build a relationship again next year. Making sure, of course, that we're meeting all of the terms and conditions, including price, volume, and quality, making sure that our product meets the need for our buyer. And then, of course, relying on human connection and inspiration. Ideally, these relationships aren't just business transactions, but grow into real friendships. And then you'll also find that there's a lot of curiosity and willingness to learn. And so sharing about the projects you're working on or the things you're learning with your customers can be a great way to foster potential collaboration in future. As far as successful sales techniques, I want to make sure that you're always getting contact information. If you meet someone on a trade show floor, you have a conversation about potentially getting them a sample of your coffee, you need to walk away with a WhatsApp number or an email and an understanding that you will be reaching out to them and expect a response back. Figuring out where they are in the customer journey is really helpful too. Are they looking to buy? Are they looking to buy for next harvest season, or are they filled up for this year's inventory? Are they looking to fill a specific gap in their menu, etc.? Be sure to ask lots of questions about their business type, about their products, about their customers, about where they are in their growth journey with their business. And set really clear timelines. I have your email. I will be sending you a message within a week. I would love to hear back from you as soon as possible. I've heard back from you. I'm sending you a sample. I would love to get feedback on that sample within 3 to 5 days. I've gotten your feedback on the sample. I would love to have this contract signed within 2 to 5 days, etc. Because again, green buyers are busy and easily distracted. Of course, allow for two-way communication. So make sure to ask them questions and to encourage them to ask any questions they might have of you. Share about your business and your path through the coffee industry. And again, sharing that easy to access promotional material, that can be social media or websites or one pagers or lot cards, anything that makes their job selling the coffee that they've just bought from you easier is a huge win. I kind of sprinted through that, but I'm ready to answer questions at the end of the session when we're ready.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And the end of the session is closing pretty quickly. We fortunately have a bit of time to answer some of your questions. And I already saw one question coming in about imports from Ethiopia. Now I can answer that one very quickly, and Hans, perhaps you can show up and distribute some questions to the other presenters. Now, most Ethiopian coffee imported by European importers are imported by German importers, followed by Belgium, and probably re-exported. France and Italy are also imported importers, and you can find much more information on the CBI website, especially about this topic in our demand study. Hans will show you around in a few more minutes. But Hans, did we have received many other questions?
Yes, we did a lot of questions, and unfortunately we will not be able to answer all of them. I will select just one for Gabriel. Someone mentioned, Gabriel, you mentioned about adding a small buffet for unfrozen circumstances. How many percentage would you suggest?
Yeah, it's a great question, simply because it's very much a case-by-case basis, and it would depend on the complexity of your supply chain. So if you feel that the currency you are working with is highly volatile, if you feel like you are new to the approach and you're not exactly sure how much the milling is going to cost or how much the shipping is going to cost, a small buffer, I mean, 5 to even up to 10% on the first shipment could be important, but it also then raises your price quite a bit. So you have to be really careful to ensure that the buffer, especially with the higher prices now we have in the market, not always working with a percentage basis, but anywhere from 10 to 20 cents of a buffer could, I mean, just as a random number to throw there, I just don't want you to attach to that number. It's really about understanding your risk and having some buffer in there to ensure careful kind of plan Bs should they arise. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you very much. Due to time, we are not able to answer all of these questions, but most of the questions the answers can be found on our website. We'll also try in the coming days to answer these questions that you have posted online through email, so you will receive them. And also these slides will be also sent to you, I think a day or two to you, and you also have the questions. And again, I'll advise to check our website. We have a few minutes, so I can share my screen and show you how to navigate on our website. 1 second. Yes. Yes, perfect. You should be seeing my screen at the moment, which is blank. So if you go to cbi.eu, it will send you to our website. Then you go to the second tab, which states market information. You scroll a little bit down and you see a coffee stand. You see coffee here. You can also type the sector that you're looking for. But you can also navigate to coffee and click on coffee. And we have a lot of information about exporting coffee to the European market. What is the demand? Which trends offer opportunities? What are the buyer requirements that your product have to apply with? We also have product fact sheets on specific products such as organic coffee, roasted coffee, and very soon we'll also have a Robusta coffee on our website. Additionally, we also have interesting export markets, so European markets where you can export your coffee to. So for instance, if you click on Belgium, you'll find the market potential and the market entry, which explains in detail what and how you can export your coffee products to Belgium, and also to which market channel is suitable for you as an exporter. Okay, that being said, I'll hand over back to the moderator, Charling.
Yes, thank you very much, Hans. And I think it's time to close off. We've been with you for 1.5 hours. I hope that was useful to all of you who wanted to start exporting coffee to the European market. I wanted to thank our presenters, our speakers, Gabriel and Sandra, for their very insightful tips that they shared with you. And well, thanks for being with us, and hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.